place where there was a different future, one in which it was tacitly observing the JCPOA to kind of limit its nuclear enrichment, in which maybe there was some type of economic future for itself connected to China, maybe to Russia, maybe as in a more stable Gulf region. All of that is gone, it looks at the moment, or is it? So the question to you, is Iran welcoming? How is it able to use this moment? Is this a moment that it's trying to put the lid on because the old future is the one that they want to get back to, one of stability? Or is it a tiger they're having to ride that they have very little control over? How do you think the Iranians see the situation right now?
I mean, I think their read of it would be, and not only them, but also the rest of the axis of resistance, but also I think other governments in the region, that the old order is basically shattered. October 7th essentially ended the order that, Saudi Arabia was thinking about normalization with Israel, was thinking about a shiny economic boom in the Gulf. That whole order has fallen apart, not just because of...
Before it ever emerged.
Before it ever emerged. But if we went back to October 6th, as Gar said, we would see a very different Middle East. Now, the new order isn't there, and I think the Iranians, Hezbollah, everybody is trying to sort of gain this. And as you mentioned at the very beginning, and Ger put it very well, we're seeing both escalation and spread of conflict. And I think the Iranians are trying to manage this. And it's important to note sort of what are they looking at and why they're acting the way they are. First of all, the war itself is escalating. So long as Gaza war is not ended, it's not de-escalating. And the next shoe is going to fall when the humanitarian crisis really hits hard. And so long as the United States and Europeans, etc., don't have any plan for ending this war, and Israel is not ready to do it, we are in an escalatory mode. So we shouldn't kid ourselves. Right. The war is ongoing. It's going through phases. It's not bombing. It's not starvation. It's now humanitarian crisis. Yep. So that's escalating. Secondly, I know in the region is very firm belief that the killing of the Hamas leader in Beirut essentially ended an unwritten agreement that existed between Hezbollah and Israel that they would not attack one another's capitals. So I think Hezbollah's view is actually that Israel is coming for it in a very big way. So it's not about whether Iran pushes the button. Hezbollah itself is increasingly in a survival mode. Right. So it's not about just acting on Iran's behalf. And we're also not out of the woods. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu keeps saying that Hezbollah needs to go, above the Litani River, and then he's going to ask for more things. It's not like they're going to stop if Hezbollah were even to go north of Litani River. As Gar said, we've seen now much more direct U.S. involvement in Iraq and Syria and in Yemen. I think we are on a path for U.S. ending up in a war in Yemen. Blood has been drawn. The scale of attacks is there. The Houthis are not going to back down now, and we're heading in that direction. And also, Iraq may end up in a war. I mean, there's one of these missile exchanges between U.S. and Iran that could, go wrong, and somebody can get killed, and we're going to be in a very different space. And even if nobody gets killed, if these continue, I think the stability of the Iraqi government and the Iraqi system is now in question. That can Iraq survive an escalated Iran-United States confrontation? And then I would say it's not just that this conflict is spreading, conflict is spreading. Yeah. And so in the past, since we arrived in Davos, Iran has hit Erbil. Yep. Iran has hit Pakistan. Just before we arrived, Iran captured the oil tanker on the Gulf, and Iran's nuclear program is now going to accelerate. Yep. Now, these are not technically, you would say, Gaza, but definitely Iran is opening new fronts. And at the same time, there was also a massive bomb that went off in Iran, killing about 100 people. And even though officially, I think the Iranians accepted that it was ISIS, because that sort of gives them cover not to have to react. But I think they don't believe that this is coincidental, that ISIS would carry out this attack in Iran right in the middle of the Gaza war. And so the real question is, what's their end game? And I think, for Iran and Hezbollah and now increasingly Houthis, they don't want Israel and the United States to dictate the pace of the Gaza war. Israel finish Gaza on its own schedule, and then decide what's going to happen after, and then decide what they're going to do with Hezbollah, and then what they're going to do with Houthis, and decide the end game, as you put it.
Yep.
So in a way, I don't think, sometimes we could become prisoner of our own words to talk about escalation, suggest that, you could also see one man's escalation is another man's deterrence. And one man's escalation, I think the Iranians and Hezbollah want to deny Israel and the United States the ability to dictate what's the new order that's going to emerge in the Middle East. And I think they're opening as many fronts at the same time in order to deny Israel and the United States that capability. I mean, we constantly talk about Houthi-Iranian relationship, but it's very important to note Houthis are very close to Hezbollah. In some ways, more close to Hezbollah than they are to Iran, and that the Houthi escalation actually got into full gear after the Israeli assassination of the Hamas leader. In other words, once Hezbollah came to a belief that an expansion of war into Lebanon looks imminent, and Israel has now put aside the 2006 agreement, the Houthis opened the Red Sea front.
Right.
And so there is a logic here more than just wanton escalation.
We can see it's going to be so difficult to do justice to all of these topics in the very limited time. I see we've got 20 minutes left, and I do want to leave 10 minutes for some questions. So please, those of you who've got some ideas, please have them ready and have them short and to the point, which would be very helpful. Let me turn back to you, Saz Rubaidi, Vice President. Let's get to the end game question. What do you think this conflict is going to do to the future of Yemen? What will happen to the future of Yemen if, as we've heard from everyone here, the situation sounds like we're still in the escalation ladder? What does this mean for the future of Yemen specifically?
مستقبل اليمن مع وجود الحوثي والتهديد والتصعيد المستمر سيكون طبعا الانتظار كارثة إنسانية لم يسبق لها مثيل. ونحن ندعو طبعا الولايات المتحدة والمجتمع الدولي إلى تشكيل مجموعات لحماية باب المندب والممر الدولي هذا الآمن، لأن الممر الدولي يتبع الأمم المتحدة ومستفيد منه كثير من الدول. الحوثي علينا أن نوجد استراتيجية ردع شاملة وكاملة في كافة مجالات السياسية والاقتصادية والعسكرية، لأن أصبح تهديد على المنطقة بشكل عام.
And are you worried about an intensification of civil war inside the region as well? Inside Yemen, I mean.
اليمن هناك طبعا ستكون محافظات محررة بيد الحكومة الشرعية، معظمها محافظة جنوبية، وفي قضية جنوبية هناك طبعا ممكن تتوسع الصراع وتعود إلى دولتين كما كانت من قبل 1990 إذا استمر الحوثي في التصعيد في باب المندب والعمل بهذه الطريقة.
And part of what the Houthis seem to have done is they are strengthening their credibility within Yemen and the region by supporting the Palestinian cause, should we say, certainly supporting the people in Gaza. Does that make life more difficult in a way for the Transitional Leadership Council?
بالعكس الحوثي يحاول استثمارها وتغطية جرائم الإنسانية الداخلية بتضامنه مع الشعب الفلسطيني والقضايا التي تحصل من ترويع للشعب الفلسطيني والانتهاكات الإنسانية. فهذه تغطية واستثمار لا يحق له أن يستثمر الشعب الفلسطيني والقضية الفلسطينية، وهذا ليس من اختصاصه، فهنا قيادة فلسطينية هي تهتم بقضيتها طبعا.
No, thank you very much. A very clear answer. Geir, let me pull you into that other area of your expertise, which is Israel, Palestine. I'm just going to ask you the question. End game. What's the end game? I'm sure you've got a very quick answer on that. But
a very simple and quick answer is that if we want a solution to this crisis, the only way out of it is a two-state solution. Then, of course, everyone would argue that this is, for the time being, extremely difficult, and it has been proven elusive during the last 30 years. But I think what the 7th of October shows is that there is no way that the Palestinians and the Israelis are going to live together in one state. So if there is no two-state solution, then there is a one-state reality that will be an apartheid state. And I think that should not be acceptable to anyone. So the point is, we need to make, and here here is a challenge to my American friends. We need to stop talking about that there should be an horizon towards a two-state solution. Right. We need now to say there is no other way out of this than a two-state solution. And we've been waiting for 30 years. My Palestinian friends that have been born after the Oslo Accords have been living in what they see as a one-state reality. Because of that, the belief in the possible two-state solution has been diminished.
Yeah.
And just an anecdote. When I lived in Jerusalem during the late 1990s and the beginning of 2000, at the time the support for Hamas was, let's say between 5 to 10%. And I remember in my discussion with my Israeli friends, they said, listen, start to take this seriously. If not, you will end up with Hamas as your interlocutor. Today, we have both Hamas and Fatah as realities, but we have also other sentiments. The question now is, if we don't deal with this now, Hamas and Fatah may be history.
Right.
There may be other things happening in Palestine that no one likes to see. And since this is my favorite topic that I'm not able to talk about every day, let me just add one other thing. Of course, for this to become a reality, settlement activities need to stop immediately. And on this, there can't be any compromise. There needs to be a very clear, and we know there are limits to what the Americans can do, but on this, there needs to be a very, very clear statement. And if this doesn't stop, basically what we're doing, we're undermining the possibility to see that the end game will emerge. And this is in no one's interest.
Yeah.
Ask me about Syria a little bit later.
Exactly. We'll see. Hopefully you'll get a question on that. All the things that Geir hasn't been able to cover, hopefully somebody will ask a question on that. So let me turn to you now, Karen. This conflict, the big question, does it have a geopolitical spillover? Where does the US play this with China? Are you expecting China to step up? There's no sign of their desire to do that at all at the moment. Russia seems to be keeping fairly quiet at the moment. Do you think this is fitting at all into the calculus of the Biden administration? They've got so much on their plate. How do you see that?
No, great question. I mean, the US has been trying to pivot to Asia for some time, all the way back to when I was in the Obama administration. And then, of course, it keeps getting distracted by events in the Middle East. I don't speak for the U.S. government, just to point that out. I worked for them years ago. But look, I think it's interesting to see that, watching Russia insert itself since September 2015, as Geir remembers when they arrived in Syria, militarily getting involved in the war. They made themselves indispensable in any conversations about peace in Syria going forward. China has been very involved in the region, financially, investments, and then of course they did this amazing rapprochement surprise, really, between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So it's quite interesting that neither of those countries are playing at least a role up front in terms of trying to push for a diplomatic solution to this challenge. I'm sure behind the scenes there's a lot going on that I don't know about, including, I'm sure, between the US and China in particular. But it is interesting that at the end of the day, the U.S. is still leading on diplomacy going forward. It's also interesting that, as we've seen with the war in Ukraine, these wars are not contained, right? I mean, Ukraine has had a huge effect at the global level because of the spillover financially, because of food shortages, energy shortages, the economic challenges. from that war. And then, of course, the Middle East, because globally there's so much emotional investment in the region and in what's going on. We've seen protests all over the world, which you don't see for other conflicts. I mean, I don't know if anybody noticed, but in September, the Azerbaijanis basically pushed Armenia out of Nagorno-Karabakh, and I didn't see one protest in the streets about that. So, these conflicts do have a global spillover effect, and I think the Americans are very aware of that, and they're working very hard. The question is, how much leeway will they have, especially while Netanyahu is in power?
And just on that, do you think the US election at the end of this year serves as any kind of spur? Does that ever any kind of feed into US positions and the kind of action that, if this war is still going on, or some version of it, we're heading into October, November, do you think this is playing at all out in Washington?
I think in this particular case, it's different from Ukraine. Trump, obviously thinks he has a very special relationship with Netanyahu. And with many Gulf leaders, but I don't think in this case that is a factor right now. It's certainly a factor in Ukraine because of concerns about continued weapon supplies being cut off, but I don't see it in the same way anyway.
Vali, let me come to you again, pick up any points you want, but you mentioned, I wouldn't say, well, I'm going to say it tantalizingly, the massive increase in Iran's nuclear program since October the 7th, enrichment up to, 90% now. I mean, a real escalation of the situation compared to where it was before. What does this tell you about Iran's approach to future regional security? Have they now just decided any kind of relationship with the West, the future US government, Europe, is kind of, forget it. We now lean more on Russia, we lean more on China, we can pursue our own direction. Is that part of what's driving their approach to this conflict?
Well, I think in the very short run, I think it's a way of, as I said, to spread the conflict. In other words, if we begin to read more news about 90% enrichment, then that's going to become also another topic the U.S. would have to address.
Right.
And then as
that doesn't worry them. I mean,
no, because I think they've their calculation of how far escalation would go, and before there's an actually outright war, it might be very different from ours.
Yeah.
And I think right now, I think the view of this axis of resistance is that it's going to be much worse for them to end up living in a Middle East that is completely dictated by U.S. and Israel than otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think they're exploring the margins, but and it's very clear in their strategy that they are pushing. So attacks in Iraq, capturing tankers, working with their allies in the region, and then the nuclear issue, all of which suggests that they're trying to push the U.S. in all sorts of ways. Right. And one outcome of this is also to force the U.S. to change its Middle East policy. Yeah. I mean, it's now 100% focused on supporting Israel's campaign in Gaza. So you have to see, from their point of view, how are you going to get the U.S. to change? And I think their calculation is that the U.S. would respond only when it faces a threat of war or it faces a grave situation. There's no diplomatic path between them right. and the U.S. But I also think that if they see a Middle East in which they're going to be in a much more aggressive posture with Israel, which I think is inevitable, that this war, if anything, has raised the possibility of a direct confrontation between the two of them in the next 5 years, several notches up, that having nuclear capability is now more important to them than it was before. I don't think the door on possibility of a nuclear agreement is 100% closed, yep. but it's only a sliver of light left, okay. and nothing's going to happen in this year because it's election year. So I think their calculation be if there's going to be talks with the next administration in the U.S., it's much better if they have a lot more leverage at that point, more stockpiles of nuclear weapons, more centrifuges, exactly. etc. And Gaza is a perfect cover. I mean, Israel doesn't have a bandwidth to threaten bombing Iran right now, and nor does the U.S. So they're taking advantage of that as well.
Okay, bleak enough for everyone in the room. So let's take some questions. We've literally got 8 minutes left, so please quickly introduce yourselves. I've got 2 hands going up. I might take them as a group, 3 hands, 4. Right, I might even have to stop there. So if you want to direct them to one of the speakers, obviously that would be helpful. Please say who they are. Very quickly say who you are as well. And let's take it. So first, the two ladies there, the one on the left, my left. And then I'll come to the gentleman here, and then I'll come to the other lady next to you. And then there was another hand somewhere around here. Sorry, you're first. Yep. You with the microphone. Yes, please.
Hi. This question is for Karen. I'm a young person representing the Global Shapers community of young leaders. This is regarding the comment about Israel not being a 51st state. I just wanted to comment, the U.S. is still heavily funding the Israeli military, including a $14 billion aid package, which largely funded weapons, contributing to the genocide. But U.S. citizens, like you said, are marching throughout the country opposing this. And as a young person who hopes for a future of peace, what do you think the U.S. government's end game is here for the war? As a young person, we hope for a future without war and for peace and for a future where all young people can live in harmony. And so I just hope that you can answer this question for us.
Thank you. And Karen, hold your thoughts replying that, because that's a very important question that needs probably a bit of reflection on how you want to answer it. The gentleman here. Yep, please. The microphone is going to come to you.
Yeah, the second lady.
I tell you what, I'll take the second question there because the microphones can stay together. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah.
No problem. My name is Rana Dajani. I'm a professor from Jordan. I'm originally Palestinian and Syrian, as most of the region. My question is to all the panelists. Following up on the earlier question, with all the disconnect from the whole globe marching against the genocide unfolding in Gaza, which is the root cause of all of this, by the way, and the loss of faith in international law and equality of human life, demonstrated very much by Western governments supporting the Ukraine but not supporting Gaza, only coming to attack the Houthis when their concerns and power is in question. So, and the stepping in of South Africa to file the complaint in the ICJ for the genocide, how do you see a shift of power in the world, from the global north to the global south, and is this, and BRICS, and how is that going to contribute to the end game? Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody could bring a microphone here to the front here.
I'll start.
No, here it is. Here it is. Please, microphone. Yep, to that person. Thank you very much.
So my perspective is that of a former Iraqi ambassador to the United States. I'm currently the climate envoy. I'll stand up.
Yeah.
I'm older than the people who spoke, so I remember things having read about them. There is a precedent where the United States intervened forcefully to force Israelis to withdraw, and that's the Suez Crisis.
Suez Crisis.
Yes.
56.
And what I'm surprised about is that nobody has picked this up. Many years ago, I had an argument with Flora Lewis, which really dates me, about history, and she said, comparaison n'est pas raison. To her, I answered, not necessarily. My question to you, to the panelists, is why can't President Biden be more like President Eisenhower and force a withdrawal of the Israelis?
That's a big question, but a very interesting one. Right, I think as I can't see the fourth hand anymore, we're very tight on time. Oh, very quick, sorry, just there. Yeah, if you can take it down to the front row. Very quickly, if you don't mind, sir.
Yeah, actually, as I can see, this is a humanitarian issue, not a political thing. End game for the Palestinians. I think you asked the same. What is the end game for the Palestinians? Because you're talking about when Israel ends the Gaza issue. Okay, what about the Palestinians? Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we've got big questions. Let me give an opportunity for each of you to say something, but I'm gonna make it very, very difficult for you, because at the end of your answer to the questions, I want you to give me a number. Okay? You have to give me a number. Number one is, at the end of this year, we're still roughly in the situation we're in now. Yeah? That is the end game going into 2025. That's number one. Number two is, actually there's a breakthrough. Some type of move towards greater stabilization, including on the Palestinian issue. We've got some sort of ceasefire. That's number two. Number three is where Vali was taking us. Actually, the end game of this is Israel versus Iran. at some level. I'll let you define how that is, but that it escalates to a point where they each feel that they've made each other so insecure. That's number 3. That has impacts, obviously, on the whole region. So, sorry to put you in that position, Vice President. If you don't want to take a number, you don't have to. But I'll let you maybe answer that question, and then some of the others have questions about Palestine and US policy. And we only have 2.5 minutes theoretically to do this. That's why I'm giving you numbers.
أنا أتفق مع المتحدثين أن الشعب الفلسطيني بحاجة إلى إقامة دولة مستقلة، وبإمكاننا الرجوع إلى المبادرة العربية التي قدمها الملك الراحل عبد الله بن عبد العزيز، وهي من توجد الرقم 2 في حالة الاستقرار بإذن الله تعالى.
You choose number 2. I've got a tick next to 2. Thank you very much. Please.
I choose number 4. And number 4 is the following. What we're seeing playing out in Gaza is basically the old world order, some way or another, coming towards an end.
Right.
What we are seeing in Syria is that the new world order is not in place.
Yeah.
But it's a place where no one can dictate the outcome. And I remind you, in Syria there are 5 foreign armies. Yeah. It's a place where the Iranians, the Russians, the Americans, the Israelis are on the same territory, and they're not capable of working out a vision together on how to solve this. And I think our message, as my message is and needs to be, is that none of you, when it comes to this world, can dictate the outcome of the conflict. There needs to be some kind of a compromise, some kind of working together. And I believe what we are seeing in Gaza is making that more difficult.
Right.
And that's why we may have a spillover along the line that Wally was mentioning.
Right.
But the point is, there is a way out of this if there is a political willingness. And on this, we need another panel. Yes.
That sounds like a 2 to me, but that's all right. I'm going to let you have your 4. Please, over to you, Karen.
Briefly on these 2 questions, they're very good questions. I think people always overestimate U.S. influence when he gives countries money, and Valley can tell you better than anyone. The U.S. gave a lot of money to Pakistan over many years and had very little leverage on what Pakistan could do. So while you think it should be easier, it's not so easy to change the rules and withdraw the money. It gets very complicated. But they do have influence. They just don't have as much as people think. And then to your point, and I'm agreeing with Gare, I think you're absolutely right that the world has changed. We don't know what the new order is going to be. Neither the United States nor China can tell countries what to do. Yeah. And smaller countries are asserting themselves in ways we haven't seen before, which is very good, actually, for the global order. But we don't quite know how it will settle out. Finally, I'm a 2, only because I'm an optimist. And I read an article that said optimists live longer than pessimists. and optimists are happy until they're depressed. So I'm going to be happy until I get depressed.
Okay. Vali, over to you. Last words.
So I would say to the questions that were raised here that for the first time, global public opinion is an actor here. I mean, if that's one of the things that actually can force a change in the United States and Israel as well. And if you listen to Hassan Nasrallah's speech of January 3rd, you could see how much emphasis he was putting on global public opinion. Secondly, I would say that, as Gare said earlier, unless the United States looks beyond just Gaza and looks beyond what happens in Gaza and thinks about a much broader sense of regional security, then we're on number 5. And I would also say that one conclusion of this panel should be that the job of managing all of this should be given to Gare. So,
And what's your number? What's your number? 1, 2, 5. Oh, that was. I'm never going.
Conditional 5.
I'm never going to try numbers again. That was a failure. But thank you very much. Look, we covered an enormous amount of issues. We've only got a minute and a half over time. And so could you please join me in thanking an excellent panel. Thank you for coming.